And so there's two places to go for the review material. One of them is in this extra reading material section of our content. And if you scroll down in there, you'll see that there is a page called Final Exam Review. And this is just sort of a point form list of the examinable material. The exam itself is going to be similar to the midterm exam in that it's open book. And so the resources that you'll have available to you will be our course notes, the Rails guides, the Rails API, the Ruby API, and any sort of GitHub repositories that I've made throughout the course will be considered open book as well. What's not considered open book material, you will not be able to access any assignments or challenges that you've done during the term. But with the provided resources, that should be more than enough. So in this point form list of review material, we have a section for models, views, controllers, and routes. Those are the main sort of areas of Rails knowledge. For models, you have to know how to go about creating database tables by way of creating a model, and also how to use migrations to modify those tables, and rake is required for both. Adding validations to a model is something we've been doing sort of throughout this course, as well as querying these models once they exist. So queries that involve where clauses or order clauses or limit clauses. When working with views, you have to know how to deal with views that were generated for you. So if you've done some scaffolding and you need to edit an existing view, you should know how to do that. So for example, if you had a scaffolded view and then you went and added a column to a particular table, you would have to update the scaffolded views to reflect that. You should be comfortable using ERB, both to echo variables into your view and to embed things like loops and conditionals. If you've been using either Haml or Slim for your project, you should feel free to use that during the exam as well. So it's if you don't know plain old ERB, that's fine. You can use the gem for Slim or Haml during the exam. Linking to routes using link to from a view, working with both form for and form tag, and the associated form building methods, building drop-down menus using there's like a spelling mistake there, or like a grammatical error. I'll have to correct that. Right now that sentence doesn't make much sense, but what I'm trying to get at is that you will have to build a form on the final exam that is, as part of it, is going to include a drop-down menu. So it'll be like an option tag with a number of, a select tag with a number of options inside of it. You should know how to work with the application layout where all the views get injected into before they're sent out as HTML, and you should also be comfortable creating and using partials. You can get through the exam without using partials, but partials will get you more marks. So there'll be marks specifically assigned to using partials throughout the final exam, and it'll just save you time. So if you don't know how to use partials, you'll spend a bit too much time on the exam, sort of copy and pasting code. As far as controllers go, creating and modifying controllers and controller actions, you should know how to do that. Passing variables from actions to views by way of instance variables, querying a model from an action to sort of stage data for a view, saving new data to a model from an action, working with the params hash. So either to get things like IDs from routes that have parameters in them, or by way of data from forms. Using the flash hash to pass data across a redirect to a layout or a view. So if you haven't used the flash hash as part of your project, you'll want to look up what it is and how it is used. It's very similar to session, except for the fact that it only persists the data you put into it for one redirect. So it's a place to stash messages for your users, and then you redirect them to a new location, and you can then extract it from that flash hash. Session will also be required, so persisting and retrieving user data using session. And redirecting to other controller actions using redirect to, and also using before filters, which are sometimes called before actions. Routing, so you should understand the scaffold-based resource routing. So when you scaffold up a thing like a model and its associated views and controllers, the routing file will have a single line in it that expands out and creates 7 different routes. You should sort of understand how that works, and you should also be comfortable creating your own routes for controller actions. And then some stuff that really didn't fit in any of those sections was just the idea that you'll be asked to create what I call sort of MVC bundles, so things that have both, or that have all 3, a model component, a views component, and a controller component, with and without scaffolding. This is not something, this next one's not something I'm going to test you on or assess you on per se, but it would be helpful to know how to use the Rails console for debugging. And of course, the general knowledge of Ruby programming is assumed. Unlike the midterm, this isn't a Ruby programming exam. So the Ruby coding you do will be sort of by way of the Rails app that you're building, but you're not going to be tested on sort of Ruby coding principles or anything along those lines like we were on the midterm. And so that's the point form view of what's coming up on the exam. As I said, you can use 2 gems, extra gems. You can use the Hamel gem or the Slim gem instead of using plain old ERB. I would not recommend using active admin on the final exam, just because that's one extra dependency that you shouldn't have to deal with during the exam. So try to keep the level of complexity of the app you're building small, and so it's not recommended to use active admin for the final. The other way to study for this is not just looking at this point form list, but I've also prepared a practice exam. And so if you go to the ultimate challenges area, just like there was a pre-midterm challenge and there was a pre-quiz challenge, there's also a final exam prep challenge. And like those midterm and pre-quiz ones, it's not a challenge that you have to submit. So this is not homework. There's no Dropbox for it. It's just to give you an idea of what the exam might feel like. And I actually recommend working your way through this challenge twice. And so my recommendation is that you do the challenge once before you even start studying, and you treat it like an exam. Just sit down, give yourself an hour or 2, and pull up the things that you would have access to during your exam. So pull up like the Rails guides, the Rails API, the Ruby API, the course notes, and see if you can get through this challenge without any difficulties. Any portion of the exam that you either can't complete, or it takes you quite a long time to complete, or you need to do a lot of sort of reference checking, those are indications to you of where to study. So by working your way through this challenge before you start studying, it'll allow you to focus what you need to study on, and then go about do your studying, and then at the end of your studying, just rewrite the challenge again. It should go a lot quicker the second time, and it will also again point out if you're done studying. So the second time going through the challenge, if you have no problems with it whatsoever, you can feel pretty confident that you'll do well on the final exam. So I won't read the whole challenge to you, but I'll give you an idea of what it involves. You start off by using scaffolding to create an MVC bundle for countries. So you'll end up with a country model and countries controller and some countries views. And countries are going to have a number of properties like name and population, median age, things that countries have. One of them is a Boolean, mandatory military service, so it's either true or false. Once you do that by way of scaffolding, I give you a few tasks to go in and change some of the scaffolded views. I ask you to add some validations to the customer model, and I also ask you to add some data by way of actually running the Rails server and adding 10 countries to the database. Once you've done that setup work, then you're going to create a new controller, and it's going to have 4 different actions. So you have to code out all of those different actions, and really all you're doing is pulling up country data in different ways based on these different actions. So there's like an index action, a by population, a by age, and by required service, and I explain what those entail below. So you'll have to not only create the controller and the actions, but also the routes for all of those things. Once you get those working, then it's time to implement simple search capabilities. So you'd like to have a page on your Rails application that the user can go to where there'll be a form and they can search for partial country names to find countries. And so it'll be a SQL-like with wildcards. If you've done the search functionality on your store, it'll be very similar to that. Because the flash hash is going to be something that I'm assessing you on, I gave you some practice with it right here. You'll have to go do some reading on how to work with that in the Rails guides. And once you get a basic search going, so you just have like a search box and a search button, then you're to add a drop down to your search where you can allow the user to further refine what they're searching through. So you'll have a search box where they can type in a partial country name, and then you'll have a select drop down where they can pick that they're either searching through all countries or that they're only searching through countries that have mandatory military service, or they're only searching through countries without mandatory military service. And so when you're sending that data to the search action that you define, you'll first have to see how the user would like the search to be carried out. Do they want it to be searched through all countries, or do they want it to be restricted in some way? And then you'll have to build up the active record queries to go with that. So there will be something very similar on the final exam. If you did not do the searching functionality for your project, make sure you spend some time getting it to work really well in this challenge, because that definitely is something you're going to have to do on the final exam. Then there's a little bit of work just for navigation. So now you've built up a bunch of functionality. You have some search functionality and a bunch of different actions that sort of filter your data in various ways. So you just need to create a menu that links to all of those controller actions that you've built, and make sure that this menu is displayed at the top of all of your views. So you can either use a partial for that, or you can just add the menu directly to the application layout. And then the last section is a fairly simple task working with session. And so what you're going to do is you're going to alter the page where the user does searching. If they are visiting the search page for the very first time, above the search form, they're going to see a message that says you are searching for the first time. If they've already performed at least one search, above the search form, they're going to see a message that says your last search was for, and then whatever they searched for last will appear. So anytime the user makes a search, you're just going to take the search query and save it into session and retrieve it later on. It's a fairly simple task, and you can expect to do something along that level of complexity in terms of session on the final exam. And I think that's really all I have to say about that. As I said, you should try to do this challenge at least once, if not twice, and sort of treat it like a practice exam. Anyone have any questions about the final? The final exam, it's a 2.5-hour exam. If you've done a lot of the marks for the project, you likely won't have much difficulty doing well on the final exam. If you haven't done a lot of work for the project, you're going to want to spend a lot of time working your way carefully through this challenge. Otherwise, there might just be too much learning to do during the exam to get through it within the time allotted. I've run similar exams in the past, and the students that it usually boils down to the students that have done the majority of their project work tell me that the exam was quite easy. But then I also have other students that haven't done much work on the project and they find it quite hard. So it'll balance out, I imagine, in that way. In the past, with an exam of a similar complexity, I think the last 2 terms, the exam average was an A. So although it's a long exam, I think it's a pretty fair exam. If you're sort of consistently getting A averages on your exams, I think that's a good thing. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that. I'll stop the screencast now.